So this is the Korean War. This is the original Victory Games version from 1986. This is a game that, one of a spate of classic games by Victory Games from the mid-80s that's been reproduced. I won't say just republished, because they all seem to get tweaked and changed and so on. In the case of this game, which is a lovely compact 2 mapper here, this got turned into something of a 4 map monster for reasons known only to Compass Games, and therefore would take up twice the space and is completely impractical. But here we've got a 2 map game, fits nicely on my table here. Got all kinds of tracks and stuff, and a lot of the tables are printed on the charts around the outside, which is slightly annoying, since getting into that side of the table for me is nigh on impossible. Thankfully, most of those tables, in fact I believe all of those tables, are reprinted in the centre pages of this rulebook. The rules are up to Victory Games normal, concise, well written, well explained standards, and run to about 32 pages, something like that, with the full rules. So what we've got going on here is a 12-turn game, but within those turns you get a sort of back and forth impulse sequence which can go on for as long as either side has got units to activate. But we've got a 12-turn game trying to capture the ebb and flow of the Korean War from 1950 to 1951, even though the war went on till 53, but it yo-yoed backwards and forwards for this first year, and then settled down to a front line roughly along the 38th parallel where everyone has started, and sat there for 2 years. Reading the historical, or reading some background, I think online I was reading some background to the Korean War, and it's one of those wars that has, because there was never a formal peace treaty, has never officially ended. North and South Korea are still technically fighting the Korean War, but let's hope that isn't taken seriously. So we have at the moment on the map a fairly sparse force of yellow North Korean units poised to invade South Korea down this end, and an even sparser set of South Korean defenders. And the reason I say sparser, the counters may look roughly as numerous, but if you look at the North Korean forces, they are 12 attack, 3 anti-tank, 7 defence divisions, and they are lined up against largely 212 regiments, and they've also got armour assets, I believe, some of these underneath them like that. So yes, a severe mismatch in strength here, even if the counter numbers, counter density looks similar. And the sort of ebb and flow of the Korean War was very roughly that the North Koreans invaded, and the strength of their troops and the T-34 tanks, that the T-34-85s that the North Koreans had, that the South Koreans pretty much didn't have any anti-tank capability, and so this lot pushed right through South Korea, and the South Koreans, aided by the UN, which was predominantly US forces, formed a perimeter around Busan, which is down in this far corner down here, and that got held. But then UN/US air power arrived and was able to interdict much of the supply lines, and that pretty much halted the North Koreans' ability for offensive action. And at the same time, the North Koreans had predicted it, but at the same time, the UN invaded Incheon and recaptured Seoul, and then there was a grand sweep back up this way as an American-led UN force counterattacked, pushed straight back through North Korea, and was getting close to the Yalu River here, which is on the border with China, And very roughly speaking, that aggravated the Chinese no end, and a large Chinese contingent then flooded in from China, and we ended up back on the 38th parallel, somewhere around here, with skirmishing backwards and forwards, but we ended up back here and then over here and then back here, blah blah blah. And the 38th parallel is this dotted line that runs the snakes across there. So yeah, it's one of the most seesaw wars that I'm aware of. It has a ridiculous back and forth the entire length of the country, which I guess is what makes it so dramatic. But obviously something of a design challenge to build that into the game. So it's going to be fascinating to see what kind of job Joe Bukowski's done here. That said, this game is incredibly highly thought of. There's a reason that all these victory games get republished or reimagined and reproduced, and it's because they're considered fairly definitive. And I think this is another one of those from that sort of epic 4-year set of what was it? They did the Civil War in '83, Vietnam 65 to 75 in '84, Pacific War in '85, and this, the Korean War in '86. That's a pretty decent quad to put out. So this this is one of those victory games classics, and I'm looking forward to seeing quite how it deserves that reputation. But everything that I've seen and even reading of the rules suggests that there's a lot of sophistication in this game, in quite what is ostensibly a fairly simple structure. It's got a lot of nuance. I'm looking forward to it a lot. I'm not looking forward to trying to read these charts and tables. I'm hoping they're not needed too much. But that, as I say, they are recreated in here, but that will involve a lot of page flippage that I'm not looking forward to either. Anyway, the first thing that happens is we do a turn 1, an abridged turn 1. Normally there are 2 sort of action phases in a turn, but we only get 1 in turn 1. And we also don't use a lot of rules about supply depots and lengths of supply lines and supply points, and there are all kinds of global tension tables and US commitment tracks and UN intervention tables and all that kind of stuff that's determining what the rules of engagement are for the UN and how many US and UN forces are being brought in and all kinds of other things. But we don't have to worry about that till turn 2. And a lot of the other supply rules for the UN we don't have to worry about until maybe turn 5 or something. So there's a phased approach to bringing the rules in this game, which I think is intended to allow a pretty free attacking start by the North Koreans, which then gets much more restrictive as they start being opposed by some troops, rather than just these sort of hastily assembled garrisons. So yeah, off we go. I'm not going to do much more of a rules intro. We'll just try and pick things as usual up in the rules as they come up in the play. Korean War then, victory game, started turn 2, and we get some new mechanics coming in turn 2. You can see there in game turn 2, the UN player declares a UN initial intervention level, a US mobilization level, and a UN rules of engagement level. And that can all seem a little bit scary, because it seems like as the player you're being asked to front load a load of important decisions and the consequences of which you don't really know. But actually it's fairly straightforward to make reasonable decisions here. Even though I've got no idea what I'm doing in the game really, I can make some decisions here. So we've got a UN commitment tracks here. There's the rules of engagement track, there's the intervention track along there, and here's the mobilization track. So the rules of engagement track essentially tells us where we're allowed to put our air power or utilize our air power, and level 1 allows us to use it south of the 38th parallel. And since we're expecting all the action to be south of the 38th parallel, at least for now, we can not worry about raising that above level 1. So we can keep that at level 1, and that gives a destabilisation value of 1. Great. Over here, the mobilisation track, there are some penalties that I didn't read properly for level 1, so I stuck it at level 2. There we go, simple. Level 2 will allow us to operate normally, and we get a destabilisation value of 4 for that, and that will give us a little bit of amphibious assault capability, and it will allow us to reform units normally, damaged units normally. That's fine, stuck it on level 2. Destabilisation value of 4, we're up to 5 destabilisation value. Then we come onto a intervention track, and this essentially determines our reinforcement schedule. But it's you can make logical decisions about this as well. I've gone for level 2, and the reason for that is here's the reinforcement schedule, here's the turn number down here, and here's our initial our intervention level here, and this is letter codes for packages of reinforcements. So you can see that in turn 2, irrespective of whether our intervention level was 2 or 6, we would still get A, B and C as packages of reinforcements this turn. In turn 3, if we stay at level 2, we only get D, but if we go 3 or higher, we get D, E or F. So we can see that in for turn 3 reinforcements, we need to push up to 3 to get all our reinforcements, and that will also do all our reinforcements for turn 4. So we don't really need to think then until turn 5 about whether we need to push up to an intervention level of 4. So the point is, you can ratchet up your intervention levels to match the reinforcements that you need on a given turn, and there's no point being on 6 until we're having to make a decision down in turn 7 or turn 9 as to whether we want these reinforcements. So right now 2 is all we need, and that gives us a destabilisation value of 8, and we add all that up. 8 plus 4 plus 1 is 13, and we look at this table at the destabilisation value total, and we cross-reference that with a d10 die roll, and we can see that on 1 to 13 we're going to get zeros all the way down, unless we've got massive modifiers, which we don't. We're going to have 0, so we're not going to change the global tension. Now the global tension is tracked on this track here. It can only go up, so if we do add to the global tension, it never comes down again, and if it reaches 7, we lose the game as the UN player. So it could have impact on our decision making later, but for now, as we make these decisions, it's relatively straightforward to come up with a sensible plan of action. We only need this, we only need this, we only need this, we're good to go, we don't change the global tension. So that looked a bit scary but wasn't, and now we're pretty much back into moving and fighting. We are going to have, both sides are going to have 3 actions from now on with their units rather than 2 in turn 1. That's going to allow them to get a lot more done, and so the North Koreans are going to be looking to use this concentration of forces to force their way through Seoul, force their way down the coastal road, and perhaps make some ground in central South Korea. So we'll see how they get on. Korean War then, turn 2 by Victory Games. Yeah, I just finished the first what's it called, action phase. There are 2 action phases each turn, apart from the first turn. 2 action phases from now on, and you really notice the difference in terms of how much the North Koreans can get done, because they've got 2 action phases instead of 1, and they've got 3 action points instead of 2. And so in the first turn their units only get 2 action points, and in the second turn they're going to end up with 6, and that's 3 times as much activity. And yeah, it's noticeable. Both sides are actually pretty happy after the first action phase. The North Koreans have taken Seoul. They pushed some division and some armour down and managed to force a retreat out of this valuable 3-point city here, and barreled through the centre here. but haven't managed to remove all the obstacles on the coast. So, you know, they have got some open targets down here on the coast and so on. So they're feeling fairly content with how things are. On the UN side, they've got an American infantry division now defending Busan, and another American infantry division just about to come in. They've managed to form up some South Korean infantry divisions as well, one here and one here, so in quite good defensive positions centrally. This one could potentially move on and block this coast road with that regiment. They're guaranteed to fall, but this one can garrison this coast. This one can fall back and garrison this road, or find a river line to sit behind. And the Americans are hoping to push a division out into Masan here, and therefore have a defensive setup in this area that they can build out from. So they're not feeling too dissatisfied with the situation either, and both sides content to push on with their plans. So I'm coming into the second action phase now. Interestingly, I've just noticed that the American air power, so the Americans brought in these two sets of units, these F-80s as air power, and these, whatever they are, F4U. Are they Corsairs, F4U? I can't remember. Anyway, those two air units came in and gave the Americans, in this instance, 3 points of combat air support. They used all those points up in combat in the first phase, and I was thinking they would reset, and they don't. Those points were for across both action phases, so they've got no air power this turn, or for this action segment, and that's something I've got to remember. The other thing you can do with air power, we'll get into it, is use it on this map to show where you're trying to interdict North Korean supply. But since we only start using the full supply rules on turn 3, there was no reason to interdict their supply, because we're not using those rules yet. So we just had some ground support. It wasn't particularly effective, but there is. I think the interdiction will be more useful, but we will get into that in turn 3 when the full supply rules come into play, and those will have a major impact on gameplay. There'll be a whole new layer of gameplay coming in on turn 3. So this is the simple stuff, and I'm cracking on with the North Korean attacks. End of turn 2 here in the Korean War then, victory games. So you can kind of see the picture here. We've got the UN forces and North Korean divisions here, and some American divisions across here around Busan, just guarding that, and a couple of South Korean regiments have held this corner down here. And the North Koreans, I'm attempting to sort of not commit all my eggs to one basket, so we didn't try and push really hard down to Busan. The divisions, the quantity of troops down there looked pretty tough, too difficult to really mount an effective assault on. We just tried we're going to go for a sort of containment and see if we can make it as hard as possible for the UN to break back out and score more points. So the game, you can win automatically as the North Koreans by taking Busan. We didn't fancy our chances of doing that. You can also win as the North Koreans immediately if the tension level gets up to 7. It's still sitting on 0, and I think there's a way the UN can win immediately, but I can't remember what it is. They're in no danger of doing it anytime soon. But the other, if without automatic victories, the game is just determined by victory points, and basically every city or a lot of cities have got values in red or in blue on them, and that's the number of victory points the UN side scores for controlling them. So this city here was worth denied one VP to the UN by taking it, and this one here denied them 3, and so on. So the North Koreans were looking at minimising the UN score by taking strategically important locations. Couldn't get down into this corner of the country, but mopped up as much as they could. So they restricted the UN to 9 victory points in that first term, 4 for Busan, 2 for a city here, and bits and bobs elsewhere. The UN, I think, need to get to about 220 or something in the 12 turns in order to score a decisive victory. I think that's the victory point level. 225 or more. A draw is 162 to 167. So you can see the UN need to be scoring at over 12 turns, 160, about 14 a turn. What's that? Something like that. So they're not actually far behind the draw level at scoring 9 on the second turn. Oh, you only get 11 turns. Anyway, however, they've not really got enough force on the board to recapture anything. You know, they can't mount an attack to recapture any of the cities garrisoned by North Korean armour and infantry divisions. So they've got to get some more stuff on the board, and of course that can cause global tension to ramp up, and global tension actually costs you, each level of global tension costs you 5 victory points a turn. So assuming it's not going to sit on 0 forever, that's going to start ratcheting up the pressure on the UN to recapture ground as well. So yeah, there's the actual play of the game I'm finding relatively straightforward. Understanding how all these points are going to add up and not add up, and who that says is the winner, is something I think you can only learn from experience. I'm just trying to make what look like sensible military decisions based on the look of the combat odds and so on. Anyway, turn 3 sees a whole new subsystem of supply come into the game, and the ability for the UN to use their air power to interdict North Korean supply. The North Koreans don't get any air power in the game, apart from in turn 1 where they get a couple of modifiers. But in general, the UN controls all the air power, and they can use it on this air display here, to air support display here, to interdict different regions, provinces, or for combat air support, as I indicated earlier. And that is going to change the balance of military operations, I suspect, quite quickly, as happened in reality. So I'm hoping the game mirrors that. I'm wondering whether my spread out approach for the North Koreans is going to make that interdiction easier or harder for the UN. I'm hoping it's going to make it harder, because we're spread across different provinces. So we've got 2 divisions in this province here, 1 sat here, 1 sat here, 2 sat here. I'm hoping that is going to water down the impact of the UN air power, but we shall see. It may also water down our fighting capabilities. So we'll see which one comes out on top. Anyway, I think I've done enough here, and we'll start on a new video on turn 3.